between galaxies, where light itself grew tired and stopped. Something was keeping time. A low pulse, steady as a heartbeat. 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats. The wreckage around it hung motionless, dead metal in dead space. But that one fragment of hull plating hummed and would not stop. If you're new here, come back tomorrow. We'll still be drifting through stories the universe doesn't want you to hear. That same pulse. Corinthus had almost mistaken it for his own body song at first, 2 days before he understood what he'd found, back when the debris field was nothing but a faint thermal irregularity against the cold. He had swum the intergalactic void for 312 years. Not continuously. The drift congregation paused at galactic edges to feed on stellar radiation, to replenish, to sing together before the next crossing. But the crossings themselves belonged to the elders. Centuries of nothing. Pure, absolute, holy nothing. The void between galaxies was sacred to the Thesauri, precisely because it held no surprises. No radiation storms, no stellar nurseries, no debris from younger species cluttering the dark with their failed ambitions. Just silence and the body song, the low constant hum a Thesauri generated through radiation pulses to keep sane across the centuries. Corinthus had made this particular crossing 11 times. He knew every subtle gradient of temperature, every distant galaxy's position relative to his drift route. He knew what belonged here. This did not belong here. The thermal irregularity resolved as he drew closer into structure. Angular, metallic, small by his standards. The largest piece was shorter than the scar tissue along his left flank, where a solar flare had caught him 60 years ago. That scar never healed properly. The tissue there couldn't absorb radiation, leaving a cold spot on his body that ached when he was underfed. It ached now. He hadn't fed in 9 months, and the nearest galaxy was still decades away. Wreckage identification took hours. His translation systems were old, designed for trade languages and drift congregation protocols, not the crude electromagnetic broadcasts that younger species used. But the markings on the hull fragments matched a pattern in his archive, and when the match resolved, his body song skipped half a beat. Human. No species traveled the intergalactic void. The Thesauri drifted it because they were built for it. Radiation feeding, vacuum dwelling, massive enough to endure the crossing. But humans were small, fragile, atmospheric. They needed hulls and air and gravity and heat. They needed everything the void did not provide. And yet here were their remains, scattered across 3 kilometers of nothing, so far from the nearest galaxy that rescue would have been a mathematical joke. How long had they been here? How had they gotten here? If you've ever stared into the dark and felt something staring back, you know why Corinthus kept drifting closer. What would you have done? He cataloged methodically because that was his function. Drift elder, yes, but also historian, the congregation's living record. Hull fragments, navigation housing, shattered, propulsion remnants suggesting a drive system his archive couldn't identify, and among the scattered containers, one labeled in human text that his translator rendered after several attempts. Emergency soup pies. He opened it expecting medical equipment, or nutrient stores, or atmospheric canisters. Inside, data crystals, hundreds of them. His translator identified the file headers. Music. All of it. Every crystal, every file, every carefully packed and labeled container in what this species had designated their emergency kit. They had packed their songs before their medicine. Corinthus circled the container twice, certain the translation was wrong. It was not wrong. In the event of catastrophe, humans grabbed rhythm first. The cold spot on his flank pulsed, a slow ache spreading half an inch further than it had that morning. And beneath him, patient and indifferent to his confusion, the deck plate kept its beat. 4 counts, 4 counts, 4 counts. The captain's log was the last thing he found, buried in navigation housing. A data core still drawing residual power from a chemical battery so primitive Corinthus almost dismissed it as corrosion. His translation systems needed 4 hours to crack the encoding, and during those hours the cold spot on his flank grew. Not quickly, not dramatically, just a slow centimeter by centimeter spread of tissue that could no longer absorb radiation from the void. Not that there was radiation to absorb out here, but the distinction mattered. A thesauri who couldn't feed was a thesauri who was cooling. A thesauri who was cooling was a thesauri whose body song would eventually thin, waver, and stop. And for his species, silence was not peace. Silence was the end of self. The log told him what these humans had done. They had survived themselves. That was the first entry's context, though the captain didn't frame it that way. The references were oblique. Wars ended, atmospheres nearly ruined, weapons built and then unbuilt. Every species in Corinthus's archive that had developed the capacity for self-destruction had, eventually, self-destructed. The mathematics were consistent across 11 galaxies and 400 million years of recorded history. Species that reached a certain technological threshold either annihilated themselves or retreated into safe, quiet civilizations that never left their home systems. No one pushed further. No one looked at the space between galaxies and thought, yes, there. Humans had. The log entries spanned months. Course corrections, system failures, a water recycler that broke so often the crew apparently gave it a name. And then, 2/3 through the record, a meeting. The captain addressing the crew, resource projections grim, return window closing. Some voices on the recording argued for turning back. The captain's response when it came was not a shout. Corinthus's translator rendered the tone as measured, absolute. We've already decided. This conversation is a courtesy. His body song stopped. The silence hit him like a wall of vacuum, which was, of course, exactly what surrounded him and had for centuries. But a thesauri never heard vacuum because a thesauri never stopped singing. The hum was autonomic, constant, older than language. It kept the mind coherent across the lightless crossings. It was identity made frequency, gone. For 3 seconds that lasted geological ages, Corinthus drifted without sound, without self. A cooling mass in empty space, no different from the wreckage around him. His scar tissue spread its numbness across his flank like frost claiming a window. The void poured in through the gap where his song had been, and he understood, not intellectually, but cellularly, what it meant that these small, fragile, atmospheric creatures had pointed themselves into this same nothing and refused to turn around. They hadn't been built for it. They had no body song to keep them whole. They had holes in recycled air and each other. And when the math said stop, they said the decision was already made, and they had packed music in their emergency kits. His song returned, thin at first, uncertain, the frequency wobbling like something learning to stand. But it returned, and as it rebuilt itself inside the cathedral of his ribs, he became aware again of the sound beneath it, the deck plate, still vibrating. 4 beats, steady, patient, keeping time in the nothing between galaxies where nothing should keep anything at all. The humans who built the ship were dead or gone or scattered across whatever fate caught them out here, and not one of them would ever know that their music had found an audience. Not one of them had built that rhythm into their hull plating, expecting a centuries-old whale drifting between galaxies to pause and listen and lose his song and find it again. They hadn't known anyone would hear. The cold spot on his flank still ached, but the body song held and wound through it now, faint and strange, a rhythm he had not chosen. 4 beats, 4 beats. Between galaxies, where light itself grew tired and stopped, something was still keeping time. If that rhythm found you the way it found Corinthus, join us here. There's always another story drifting in the dark, and the next one is already on its way.